Welcome. If you're joining us for the first time this morning, welcome. I'm Carl Dieter, and I'm a member of the Unitarian Universalist Fellowship of Clemson's Worship Associates team. It's good to be here and to be with you. Whoever you are, wherever you are on your life journey, you are welcome here. Whomever you love, wherever you were born, whatever language you speak, you are welcome here. Whatever your skin color, whatever your class background, whatever your range of abilities, you are welcome here. We are so glad that you chose our fellowship as your place of worship this morning. We come together for worship in order to slow down and listen for the callings of our heart, our spirits. We come together for worship so that we can be reminded of our highest aspirations and continue to transform ourselves into our best selves. If you're joining us for the first time this morning, welcome. After the service, we gather for coffee and social connections in the social room. Please join us. If you're interested in getting our weekly newsletter so you can get connected to our community, our weekly sharing of joys and concerns, and our collective efforts to support local social justice, please reach out to the office by the email on our website. Before we begin our worship services, I have a few announcements to share with you. The in-gathering service in 2 weeks, please bring your water for the water ceremony. That will be a part of the service, followed by a potluck. Other announcements. The recurring announcements are in the weekly connections and the newsletter online, so please look at those to find that information. UUFC presents Happy Hour Movie Night, August 27th, 2022, 5 p.m., screening the HBO documentary, The Janeses. The benevolence giving for the month of August, 25% will go to the Family Promise of Pickens County. Their mission is to help low-income families achieving lasting independence. The Greenville Literary Association is having the 21st annual really good, really big, really great book sale, August 12th and 14th. So today is the last day, and it is really great because you can fill up a shopping bag of books for $10. The Southeast Winter Institute Mid-Florida meeting is open for pre-registration, and the Institute will be meeting in Tampa for the first time on December 25th. So now if you would stand and greet one another. Okay.
If you want to announce it.
Okay.
Do you have a question? You're good?
I'm good.
Yes, yours.
Okay, we're good.
All right.
Please remain standing for hymn number 188, Come Whoever You Are, and we will be singing the hymn twice. Opening words. Awaken to this gift by Reverend Gretchen Haley. Open the door of your hesitant heart. Let the light shine on all the sleeping shadows. Awaken to this day that offers itself to you and to all with great extravagance. Awaken to this gift, this beauty, this chance, that we might still begin again and anew, that we might be changed by the in and out of breath, that we might still burst forth like the crocus, that we might still surprise this earth with a new song, sung together, calling us all in, and then sending us back out, and know it all as a blessing. Come, let us worship together.
Thank you, Carl, for the welcome, and it is so good to be with you. I am Reverend Christina Branum-Martin, the interim minister here at the fellowship, and I light our chalice now with these beautiful words. Remembering today again that we do not sing or hope or love alone. Let us celebrate together the coming of our lives, this meeting of energy and attention in this place that we call the fellowship. One of the things we do each Sunday is we share in our words of affirmation. This is our spoken covenant that this community gathers together around, that we recite together so that we can be grounded in our bonds together. Would you share with me in the reading of them? We gather together in the spirit of love, with justice as our guide. This is our chosen covenant, to dwell together in peace, to seek the truth with freedom, and to care for one another. And we've got a wonderful story today that Karen is going to present, one of my favorites. It's a new book, and I hope you enjoy it.
Good morning. What a gorgeous day, huh? Okay, our story this morning is about a character that I think we all know from our childhoods and teaching our children, but this is a slightly different version of his story. It's called After the Fall by Dan Santat. My name is Humpty Dumpty. This was my favorite spot, high up on the wall. I know it's an odd place for an egg to be, but I loved being close to the birds. Then one day, I fell. I'm sort of famous for that part. Folks called it the Great Fall, which sounds a little grand. It was just an accident, but it changed my life. Fortunately, all the king's men managed to put me back together again. Well, most of me. There were parts that couldn't be healed with bandages and glue. After that day, I became afraid of heights. I was so scared that it kept me from enjoying some of my favorite things. I walked past that wall every day, and I would think about climbing that ladder again. I really missed the birds and being high above the city, but I could never do it because I knew that accidents can happen. I eventually settled for watching the birds from the ground. It wasn't the same, but it was better than nothing. Then one day, an idea flew by. Making planes was harder than I thought. It was easy to get cuts and scratches. But day after day, I kept trying and trying until I got it just right. My plane was perfect, and it flew like nothing could stop it. I hadn't felt that happy in a long time. It wasn't the same thing as being up in the sky with the birds, but it was close enough. Unfortunately, accidents happen. They always do. I almost walked away again, but then I thought about all the time I'd spent working on my plane and all the things I'd missed. I decided I was going to climb that wall. But the higher I got, the more nervous I felt. I didn't want to admit it. I was terrified. I didn't look up, I didn't look down, I just kept climbing, one step at a time, until I was no longer afraid. Maybe now you won't think of me as that egg who was famous for falling. Hopefully, you'll remember me as the egg who got back up and learned how to fly.
Thank you, Karen. I love the shift of that story. I want to bring your attention to something you might have seen as you walked in the building. You might have seen some bright colors on the tree in the front. Some people call that guerrilla graffiti, or a yarn bomb, or yarn graffiti, and wool graffiti. So what this is our statement as a community, reaffirming our support for the LGBTQ plus community. And this congregation became a welcoming congregation about 20 years ago. And a lot of things have shifted and changed and evolved since then, and we are in the process this year of recommitting ourselves to that work. And so one of the things about putting that out on the tree was it is a visible statement to the community outside of this building, and a lot of fun for us too. That project of putting it together, different people did different stripes, and then we got together and stitched them together. And today we actually crocheted onto the tree. And I want to thank all of those who participated. If you crocheted or knit part of it, could you raise your hand? All right, we got 4 of the knitters here, or crocheters here. And I got up there on the ladder and did the top part, so I'll raise my hand for that part. This is the time in our service in which we gather our support for the work of this congregation and also our place in the community at large. Each week we take up an offering. It is good to remind ourselves from time to time that this is symbolic and also practical. We know that it is through these pledges that we build our budget, that we fund our programs and the work of this congregation, and our religious education program for our children and adults. And we finance the comfort and the beauty of this building. We know that we could easily submit a check online or a check here, but it's important to know that this convenient time is one that is also symbolic of your commitment to each other. So as we pass these bowls, please know that they are gratefully received. Lots of green cards today. Ellen Few has a joy. My husband's 75th birthday and trip will be taken this week to celebrate it. We celebrate you. Where'd you go? Oh, he went out. That's what I was saying. I don't see Jim. Okay. Well, happy birthday, Jim. And Mel wants to give a second reminder about our in-gathering, our water ceremony on the 28th, along with a really great potluck. We have quite a few visitors today, and I want to explain what the water ceremony is just briefly. On your way out, you'll see a small container that looks like the old film canisters, you know, the kind we used to have when we had film in our camera. We were given a canister at the beginning of the summer as we ended our year, so that we could gather water during our summer away from each other and bring it back to a ceremony that helps us not only focus on what water is in our life, but also the places it takes us and the places it travels and how important it is. I know we've got some stories to share about where our waters came from. So some people have a symbolic amount of water that they get from their tap and put in the container. And if that's something that you can do to participate, please feel free to do so. I'll be bringing water from afar, and I know some others went to other places in the world to bring water. So please participate in all that you can. Wow, I'm so glad. Leslie has a joy. Leslie, after a 4-week bout of COVID in the hospital and rehab and on a ventilator, my brother is back home. Oh. Holly has a sorrow. Her sorrow is that the attack on Salman Rushdie which my friend Saudi and I witnessed at Chautauqua on Friday. I understand he's off a ventilator, but not doing well in other ways. I'm really sorry you were there to witness that.
It's such a peaceful place.
Yeah.
And there's no security because it's never been.
Yeah. So for those of you who are at home who couldn't hear Holly, she said it's such a peaceful place, so the thought of having security in such a place is unthinkable. Yeah. It is now in the thoughts. Elaine Faithful is celebrating her granddaughter's 21st birthday. How fantastic. This is not a green card. I'm hoping it's one. Oh, Joseph wants to say thank you to everybody for the love shared. And guess what, Joseph? I can't read it all because I don't have my readers on. It's really tiny print. Would you like to read it for us? Or you want to tell us? Oh, you don't have your readers either. Okay, may I put a stone in with a big grand thank you from you? All right, okay. The last one I want to share is that Meg Williamson is supporting Ajmal Nuristani with some support for dental work. He worked with us in the garden, and he was part of a group of Afghan refugees that were resettled here in Clemson. And if you'd like to participate in supporting his need, you can contact Meg Williamson, and she's got a GoFundMe. Some people are also putting money into the minister's discretionary fund so that I can send that to him directly. And please feel free to do that with me or online. You can do that through our online donation. This stone is for all of the things that remain in our heart. The sharing of joys and concerns in our community is one of the things that brings us together. It helps us when times are hard. It helps us when we celebrate things in life. May this final stone be the things that are yet to be shared. So, Karen, we're going to sing you out. Please join me in the spirit of prayer and meditation to find that quiet place in your center that allows for you to be present right here, right now. Kate Lohr wrote these words: "I sometimes forget that I was created for joy. My mind is too busy, my heart is too heavy for me to remember that I have been called to dance the sacred dance of life, that I was created to smile, to love, to be lifted up and to lift others up. O sacred one within you and within me, untangle my feet from all that ensnares. Free my soul, that we might dance, and that our dancing might be contagious." These are words inspired by the words of Hafiz. Hafiz was a Persian poet who wrote those words almost 900 years ago. May we dance together. Amen. Corey, thank you very much for the gift of music. Sometimes the most serene moments are in our moments together in silence and in listening to you play. Thank you. So last week I told a story about a minister named Forrest Church. And after the service, I was talking to one of the persons who listened and he said, "Who was this first church person?" So I wanted to be clear that the name Forrest Church might sometimes come out sounding like First Church, but it is a person and not a place. So Forrest Church was a minister in Washington, D.C. For over 30 years of a very large and vibrant congregation. And he wrote a book that is really beautiful called Love and Death at the end of his life, and I wanted to share some of his story with you. So I told some last week, and I'm going to tell you more today. There's a great story that Reverend Peter Fredericks talks about when he also reflects on the writing of Forest Church. And Peter Frederick starts out talking about finding himself, not only through his call to his work as a minister, but by working as a chaplain. He writes this: "As part of my seminary training, I spent a summer working as a hospital chaplain assigned to the psychiatric floor. I found it to be deeply gratifying work. I was able to build relationships with many of my patients. Some were long-term and others had a really quick turnaround. Those who came and went and then came back were called bouncers. They were admitted to the unit often from a behavioral issue, and it was most often when they came off their meds, became stabilized, went back home, and the cycle continued. Treated and then released. In my course of my 8 weeks as a hospital chaplain, some patients bounced several times. I can't imagine that." Peter Friedrichs writes, "My favorite bouncer was Rose. Rose was a lovely woman, about 80 years old, who suffered from schizophrenia. And Rose we brought into the unit very agitated and aggressive, but within a day or so, with the proper medications and a chance to be heard, she was as sweet as a peach. Rose and I had many long conversations about God, love, and heaven, and she was a rock-solid person who believed in her Baptist faith. During one of her conversations, Rose expressed to me her concern about all the people interviewing her and examining her, because she was tired of being treated, as she called, as a lab rat. And she told me she was afraid to talk to the doctors. I tried to reassure that they were there to help her, and I suggested that she just be honest with them in answering their questions. Just be yourself, I said, and they'll take good care of you. Rose's response to my sage advice was a very priceless gem, and I'll never forget it. She said, "Be myself? Of course. I've got to be myself, because everybody else is taken." That reminds me of one of the mantras in the book Love and Death I was speaking about that Forest Church wrote. He had 3 mantras. One is, want what you have, and we talked about that last week. Another was, do what you can, and we'll talk about that in another week coming. Today we will explore be who you are. So to understand be who you are, I'm going to ground it in the other 2, just briefly. First, want what you have. He's telling us not to settle. And he's reminding us that even when things look grim, there is so much to be thankful for. He uses the metaphor of a window with many panes of glass, like a piece of stained glass. And each pane represents different aspects of our lives: our health, our job, our relationships, our aspects of self-worth. And when one pane gets clouded over, he tells us that we must urge ourselves to resist pressing our noses to those darkened panes and forgetting to step back and see the places where the light is still coming in. Do what you can was his other mantra. He talks about claiming your own power, even knowing and accepting our own limitations. He writes that doing what you can means doing all that you can, no more or no less. It's not just mucking by, he says. And it's not trying to do more than you can do either, by stretching yourself out so far that you end up leading to failure. When we do what we can achieve significant goals in our lives that lie within our power. It's the risking failure that sets ourselves up for certain defeat. And I find that particular one has a lot of nuance to it, and I look forward to digging into that in the future. So the want what you have, do what you can, and today's be who you are the tripod of Forest Church's mantra. Be who you are, Forest says, is the hardest of them all. Simply put, he tells us, importantly, not to fake your existence. He says each one of us is unique, with unique flaws and gifts. And the world doesn't owe us a living. We owe the world our living, our very own individual way of doing so. And in his book, Love and Death, Forest Church tells us of the opportunity he had in his own life. He shared that his father, who was the Senator Frank Church, invited him to enter politics when he himself was working on a doctorate in theology. And he stepped away from his studies, and he ran his father's presidential primary campaign in Nebraska. And he considered following in his father's footsteps. But fortunately, his father pulled him aside and gave him some advice. His father said, "Live your own life, not the life that I'm living." And in so doing, I found my own calling. I answered to a call that was mine and not someone else's. And so he goes on to tell the story to not envy another's skills, looks, or gifts. Rather, embrace your own nature and know that to not answer your call is itself a failure. So be who you are. As Rose pointed out, it's a rather inane and simple concept because, of course, you are who you are. You are who you are because everybody else is already taken, right? But if it's so simple, why do we go around spending so much of our lives trying to be someone we're not? Trying to be like someone else, the way someone else thinks or looks or acts or makes us feel like we need to be like them, because being who we are is no easy task. Consider for a moment our childhood. We learn most of what we come to know by copying ourselves by other people. Our intellect develops, and certainly we have our own ideas, but we do so on the playground by following the leader. Often in the school systems that are not giving you space to become your own person, you must answer the history questions based on what the teacher tells you is the truth. It's like we are told as a child, be yourself, kind of. Just a little. But how many of us heard, couldn't you just be a little bit more like your brother or your cousin or your father? We all have those moments in our lives where we were told to be someone else that we weren't. And then we spend the rest of our lives unlearning that, sometimes in therapy, sometimes through our relationships, and sometimes through our own disappointments in ourselves. Yes, role models are invaluable for us, both on a societal and an individual level. They serve to inspire us and motivate us and to consider what is possible. And there are certain traits and aspects of others that we should try to emulate. I grew up at a time when Superman and Batman were really all the rage on TV, and who couldn't argue that truth and justice in the American way wasn't something that would be good to follow, right? The danger comes, of course, when we try not to be just like our role models, but to become them. And this is a recipe for disaster, Forest Church says. The formula for failure. Neither you nor I will ever be more powerful than a locomotive or capable of leaping tall buildings on a single bound. So, we do our best to emulate others, but not try to be superheroes and with superpowers. In Forest Church's case, he came close to making the mistake of trying to become like his father, the powerful Senator Frank Church of Idaho. And sometimes the influences in our lives are more subtle. We grow up in a family of achievers, and although nothing is explicitly stated, we incorporate the message that so much is expected of us. A parent's well-intentioned action and message sends a signal that they hope for the best in us, and we receive the gesture, consciously or subconsciously, as a mandate. If you hear things like, "You're so good in math, you should become a scientist," enough times a child might believe that they should actually become a scientist and nothing else. And then their passion for dance is misplaced, or for social work. And that same token over and over again, we all know that so many of us here, you'll amount to nothing, and that becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. The forces that dictate against being who we are, the powerful and beautiful and joyful persons that we can be, is like swimming upstream against those expectations and that tyranny of shoulds. It's as if the forces aren't enough to defeat us, to be who we are made to be in a challenging time. So, as Forest Church puts it, perhaps the greatest challenge in our lives is to be who you are, to discover your own passions, and to live up to them. Living in the 21st century America, many of us, most of us here, live lives of comfort and ease, certainly in comparison to many other people living in the world. And so we can ask those big and bold questions. Who am I? What do I want to be when I grow up? What do I need? And many of us spend thousands and thousands of dollars on therapy in our lives trying to answer that question. And in finding them, sometimes we actually find our bliss and follow it. Joseph Campbell says that while others, constrained by factors such as fear and family and finances, until your days run out, that instead we are called to our true self, to be self-planted in us, and to follow God's image of ourselves. That the self wants nothing more or less than for us to be who we were created to be. That journey to discover this God-given self takes courage and commitment, says Parker Palmer. It's a risky business. It's when we shed the masks and the costumes and all the things that we thought we needed to wear and be in order to be accepted. Parker Palmer writes that we are called to be ourselves, to claim ourselves, warts and all. And in this, to know yourself as a person of weakness and strength, liability and giftedness, darkness and light, and to know the whole rejects none of it, but embraces all of it. So, this might all sound like narcissistic navel-gazing, but it is imperative that we discover our true selves and claim our wholeness in order to fulfill what Forest Church says, not only to be who you are, but to do what you can. You must first know who you are. When we cling to ideas of ourselves separate from who we are, we don't embrace our wholeness. Parker Palmer writes, when we don't do that, it makes life more demanding, because once you do embrace all of you, you live out your joy in your life, like in that reading and that prayer, that we live joyfully so that we can dance. Well, the good news is it's never too late. It's never too late to start that journey of self-discovery or shedding the skin we've worn since birth, like an ill-fitting suit that never felt quite right. There's a poem by Mary Sarton. She writes that she herself was finding herself and shedding her own skin of the things that didn't feel right. It was beautiful to learn that she wrote that at the age of 83. Now is the time, when the time is young, she concludes. So I want to wrap up this sermon about Forest Church, knowing that Forest Church wrote all of this at the end of his life, as he himself was diagnosed with a very aggressive cancer. And he wrote a book about these 3 mantras, wanting to make sure that even though he had lived into them in his own ministry and his own leadership at that congregation, that he put them down on paper and was able to share them verbally. He had a spiritual practice that he engaged in every week. He would conclude his sermons with the words, "Amen, I love you, and may God bless you all." Just weeks before his death, he explained why he said, "I love you," at the end of his sermons. When I say I love you from the pulpit at the end, something connects. I get connected to the congregation, and they get connected to each other, and we all get connected to something larger than ourselves. It's the human form of love itself that some people call the divine. And Church went on. Someone once told me that I'm the only person in her life that says, "I love you." So she comes to church on Sundays, he said, because that is where she knows she matters. We all yearn to matter. We all yearn to know that our true selves are worthy of love and capable of loving. And it's in our common humanity that we share our vulnerabilities and our sensibilities, and that we offer them here in this altar of hope and love. I know that deep within me, that I hope for all of us that we might find it within ourselves each and every day, and that what we want and what we can be and who we are is a way that we live our lives. Amen. I love you, and may God bless us all. And Carl now has a reflection on Be Who You Are also.
Be who you are. The simplicity of the phrase makes it sound very dangerous, like those warning signs. Be careful. Watch your step. Caution, wet floor. When I heard Christina state the third of Unitarian Universalist minister Forrest Church's 3 mantras, be who you are, my ears pricked up like my cats when I call their names. The mantra aroused my interest because, like my cats, I often get into trouble when I am being most fully who I am. A short story illustrates how being who you are is filled with difficulty, complexity, ambiguity, and unintended consequences that challenge us all. After interviewing for a faculty position at Clemson, my PhD advisor called me up and asked, "How did the interview go?" I said I thought it went well. He replied with annoyance, "Wrong, wrong, wrong, it went badly." "Carl, understand that they liked your chemistry, but they thought that you came across as an aggressive Northern Yankee." When I told a colleague in Boston, he laughed extravagantly and said profoundly, "Well, Carl, you can't change the color of your stripes." It appears that much of who we are is hardwired and then slightly modified by experience and personal history. But being who you are becomes problematic when your I bumps into all the other I's, as well as the universe in which you move. When Church tells us not to fake your existence, he leaves unrevealed the enormous headwinds found in the human practice of all religions, values, and moral philosophies against which sincere and authentic individuals struggle. Although the often unexamined ideals of love, kindness, and compassion can be liberating for the self, they also can become dogma and idolatry and a tool in social coercion. John Stuart Mill presciently warned that in democracy, the greatest threat to freedom, and thus the freedom to be who you are, would not be coercive government, but the oppressive pressure for social conformity. But perhaps this clash of egos is based on an illusion. Perhaps being who we are is a misleading illusion if it focuses on a lonely I with an ego separated from the rest of the universe. Modern neuroscience tells us there is no I, no center in the brain where a conscious self resides. That which we associate with self-awareness is a construction of neural impulses. When you watch your figure move to touch your other hand, the separate sensations of sight, motion, and touch are constructed in separate regions of the brain and then combined to give the illusion of an I engaged in some activity. Alan Watts, in his book, The Book, on the taboo against knowing who you are, combines this neuroscience perspective with the religious teachings of Vedanta Hindu philosophy and the mystical view that we are all part and parcel of the universe. Can we reconcile the deeply felt sensation of an individual I, separate and unique, with the contrary neuroscience view that this sensation is a fabricated construction, and the mystical view that we're all part and parcel of the universe and everything it contains? When enthralled and enamored by being who I am, I sometimes get in trouble and then feel anguish and sorrow for those who have experienced the expression of my being in a negative way. Amid these experiences, I often find a ray of sunshine, a silver lining in the clouds. It strikes me as a miracle, a sense of winning the lottery against all odds, that Janice found me and I asked her to marry me. Perhaps one of the greatest blessings of life is to share a long and contented marriage or relationship where each person accepts the other in being who they are, without reservation, without the need for masks, pretensions, or deceptions. There were times when, being who I am, I heard some of you lament, "Poor Janice." And in those moments, I loved her even more. In the biblical expression of "the two shall become one flesh," there is an opportunity for the simultaneous experience and expression of I and thou. Perhaps on a wider scale and with less emotional intimacy than a marriage, our often awkward and cumbersome Unitarian Universalist 7 principles may provide a framework for creating a union of I and thou, of our heartfelt individual ego and the mystical truth that each of us is part of the fabric of the universe, from the atoms that form the structures of our bodies to the actions and expressions of that illusion we call I. From this awareness, perhaps, we can grope toward a shared reality where when we love others, we love ourselves. When we harm others, we harm ourselves. When we are indifferent to others' pain and suffering, we are indifferent to our own. When we care for others, we care for ourselves. And when we accept others for who they are, we accept ourselves. I am reminded of Polonius' soliloquy in Shakespeare's play, Hamlet, offering advice to his son, Laertes. "This, above all, to thine own self be true, and as the night follows the day, thou canst not then be false to any man or woman." If you'll stand, we'll sing hymn 108, "My Life Flows in Endless Song."
I lost my closing words, but I have found them. I close with the words from Parker Palmer, who wrote in Let Your Life Speak. Our deepest calling is to grow into our authentic selfhood, whether or not it conforms to some image of who we ought to be. And as we do, we will not only find the joy that every human being seeks, we will also find our path of authentic service in the world. So on that note, I put out this chalice knowing that we have come together today in community, and this thus begins our week of service in the community. May our place in the world and in this community bring joy and love to others. Thank you.